Got 100 steps left to go. Tonight I'll make it 99. By rayrae118. Chapter 3. Ginny looked up from her breakfast at the soft pop of a house elf appearing in the room. She looked down and slightly to the left, and smiled, recognizing Tippy. "Miss Weasley, Miss Lovegood, these letters have arrived for you," the elf squeaked, passing 2 official-looking letters to the girls. Ginny and Luna took them with thanks, as the rest of the group also looked up from their meals.
"Are those your OWL results?" Harry asked with interest, putting down his fork.
Ginny nodded, suddenly nervous. "I think so," she replied.
Harry smiled. "Open it then. You know you did brilliantly, Gin. You shouldn't be worried."
Ginny gulped and complied, ripping the envelope open gently and pulling out the piece of parchment within. She let out a huge sigh as she read, feeling a knot in her chest loosen. Passing scores. Outstanding, O. Exceeds expectations, E. A. Acceptable. Failing scores. P. Poor. D. Dreadful. T. Troll. OWL results for Ginevra Molly Weasley. Defense against the dark arts, O. Charms, O. Transfiguration, O. Potions, O. Ancient runes, E. Arithmancy, E. Care of magical creatures, E. History, A. Herbology, E. Astronomy, E. Harry leaned over and gave her a kiss on the cheek.
"Congratulations, Gin," he said, smiling widely. "I knew you'd do great."
Ginny looked up and grinned, before surrendering her results to Hermione. Luna also willingly passed her scores around, and accepted the congratulations with humility, smiling dreamily and nodding her pleasure at a solid performance. When Harry read Luna's scores, he beamed proudly at his younger friend.
"This is really great, Luna! Congratulations!"
Luna looked at him, her gaze sharpening slightly, not appearing so vacant anymore. "I really couldn't have done it without you, Harry. I should be thanking you. Really, you are a brilliant teacher." Harry blushed, and not knowing how to respond, just returned his gaze to the OWL results in his hands. OWL results for Luna Alia Lovegood. Defense against the dark arts, E. Charms, O. Transfiguration, E. Potions, E. Ancient runes, E. Arithmancy, E. Care of magical creatures, O. History, E. Herbology, O. Astronomy, E. Blaise gave his girlfriend another kiss before they headed down to the training room to get some practice in. A few days later, everyone was eating breakfast when Tibby popped in once more, this time with multiple letters in her hands. "Mistress have given these letters to Tibby to be given to young masters and mistresses," she squeaked. Harry thanked her as he took in the letters and passed them around to the table to his friends. He was distracted as he opened his letter by a loud and disbelieving gasp from several places down the table. He looked up, startled and slightly concerned, and was confused to see Susan looking wide-eyed at something in her hands.
"Susan?" he asked hesitantly. "Is something wrong?"
Susan looked up, startled, and the object she had been holding became visible. It was a badge, much like the one they had both received before their 5th year, when he had been awarded the position of prefect. He frowned, still confused, so Susan elaborated. I'm a head girl. I don't..." She still seemed to be in a state of shock. Hermione was also staring at the badge in her friend's hands, her own expression currently stuck on disbelief. Indeed, everyone seemed to be rather surprised, even though Harry had to admit to himself that he wasn't too shocked. He knew that the professors had their reasons, and could even guess at some of them. Before anyone could say anything, Hermione stood up and left the room.
"Harry!"
Harry turned his head quickly at Ron's strangled voice. His best mate was currently staring at the badge in his own hands. He looked up shakily, his confused gaze meeting Harry's calm one. Harry nodded slightly, smiling.
"Congratulations, Ron. Though I have to say, if I'm still not Suka, we're going to have some issues."
The rest of the group looked over, confused, to see Ron holding a shiny Quidditch captain's badge. Blaise frowned, confused.
Wait, I thought...
Harry shrugged and opened his own letter, pulling out the head boy badge.
I told Aunt Minerva that I didn't want both positions.
They all congratulated him on his appointment, and then Neville, when the 7th year opened his letter to find that he had been appointed as the 7th year Gryffindor boy prefect in Harry's place. After a few minutes, Harry quietly excused himself from the table and headed for the door, telling the others he'd meet up with them later. Ginny's approving thoughts followed him through the castle until he found Hermione exactly where he thought she would be, seated in a small table at the library. He sighed as he sat down, but didn't say anything for a few minutes. Finally, Hermione spoke, her voice soft and uncertain. "It was everything I worked for." She sounded so lost that Harry had to catch himself and think about what he was going to say next. After a minute, he sighed.
Hermione, you're probably one of the smartest people I know. You've been on top of our class since year 1.
Hermione nodded eagerly. "Exactly, and—"
But,
Harry cut her off, his expression serious.
Being head girl is about more than intelligence. It's about being a mentor, a leader, and at times a therapist to other students. It's not enough to just be the best in class. You need to be someone that anyone would feel comfortable approaching.
He bit his lip.
Hermione, I love you like a sister, but you can be a bit overbearing sometimes, especially when it comes to schoolwork.
Hermione looked insulted.
You've definitely gotten better in the last few years, but you can still be a bit haughty.
Hermione opened her mouth to retort, and then closed it, looking suddenly ashamed. She almost wilted in her seat. "Am I really that bad?" she asked, sniffing softly as she gazed at her friend. Harry smiled, trying to make her feel better, while still getting his point across.
Hermione, you're a great person and an amazing friend. You're smart and you've been a great asset at the DA meetings. But something I've noticed from the younger students is that they tend to shy away from approaching you to ask a question when they could ask someone else. I think they're intimidated. You're not quite as approachable to the younger years as Susan is. Please don't be offended and just realise that the professors made a decision based on what they thought would be best for the student population as a whole. You're still a prefect and one of the best in our year.
Hermione sighed, looking down at her hands. "I guess you're right," she admitted. I always thought I'd be head girl. I never doubted it. I guess I was just surprised." Harry leaned over and gave her a tight hug.
Please don't be upset by what I'm telling you, Hermione. I'm not trying to be hurtful.
Hermione nodded, smiling slightly. "I know, Harry. Thank you for being honest, and getting me to see the truth." She glanced towards the door. "We should probably be getting back, shouldn't we? The others will be wondering where we are." Harry didn't say anything, but his expression clearly showed his agreement, and together the two returned to the dining room. The rest of their friends were still seated around the table, talking about the coming school year, but they stopped when Harry and Hermione entered. "Sorry about that," Hermione said, looking around the table, but not really meeting anyone's eyes. "And congratulations, Susan. You deserve it." Susan nodded, though she, along with everyone else, could tell that Hermione's heart wasn't quite in it. Thankfully for Hermione, though, no one called her out on it, and instead they headed down to the basement, some of them making for the dueling room, while Harry, Daphne, and Ginny and Hermione headed down to the potions lab. They spent most of the day in the basement. After almost 10 minutes of questions, Hermione turned to Neville. "Are you going to be claiming your lordship this summer as well?" she asked curiously. Neville flushed slightly and looked down at his lap. "My situation's a little different," he admitted. "Technically, my dad's still alive, just incapacitated. When I turn 21, my grandmother and I can petition to declare him unfit so that I can take over the family and the duties of the head of house." Hermione looked unsettled and a little guilty. I'm sorry, Neville. I didn't mean to pry.
Neville shrugged, but didn't look like he wanted to continue this conversation any time soon, so Hermione turned to look back at Susan.
What about you?
She asked, a little hesitantly, hoping she wasn't stepping on any toes.
Susan bit her lip. It's different when you're a noble family, rather than an ancient and noble one, she explained. There's less formality and fewer traditions to uphold. It's also a bit removed from the spotlight. If you ask most people in the wizarding world, they could tell you most every ancient and noble house. But the only noble ones they know are those who have made a name for themselves. She nodded towards Ron and Ginny. Like the Weasleys, well known for their strong magical ability and large families. She shrugged. I guess you could say the Boneses are pretty well known by now, too, because of my aunt. The Abbotts have given the wizarding world many celebrated healers. And of course there's the Macmillans, who are responsible for a huge part of the import and export business in Britain. As it is, Aunt Amelia's been acting as the Bones family regent until I'm ready to take over, which I'll do after graduation, so that I'm not trying to concentrate on any WTs and head of house duties at the same time. She glanced at Harry. Not all of us can multitask so well. She smiled and Harry shrugged agreeably.
Hermione looked only slightly less baffled.
So your family doesn't really have to worry about any of this, either?
She turned to Ron for clarification. Even though Ron wasn't going to inherit a title, he should still know about the procedure. Ron nodded.
Things are a bit complicated with our family, actually,
he admitted.
I overheard a conversation between Mum and Dad a couple of weeks ago about head of house duties. Apparently Mum was approached by her uncle Ignatius, her dad's brother. Great Uncle Ignatius has managed the Pruitt family interests ever since grandfather died. But he doesn't want to do it much longer, so he's talked to Mum and Dad about passing the role of head of house on. Since he doesn't have any kids of his own, supposedly either Bill or Charlie could accept and become the head of House Pruitt.
Ginny gaped. Why didn't you tell me any of this?
She asked. Ron shrugged. I didn't really think it mattered too much for us. It's not like either of us are going to become the head of House Pruitt.
Neville tilted his head to the side. That's a pretty big boost, he commented. The Pruitt family is an ancient and noble one, but the seat has been empty since Septimus Pruitt was killed on the last war, shortly after the attack that killed his sons Gideon and Fabian.
Ginny winced at the names of the uncles she had never known. From what her mum had said, they had been a lot like Fred and George. Ron nodded, his expression sombre at the mention of his deceased relatives. Dad's already named Bill as his heir, but if Bill wanted, he could talk to Dad about passing the title on to Charlie, so that he could claim the Pruitt family headship.
Will he do that?
Hermione asked curiously. Ron shrugged, looking suddenly uncomfortable. Honestly, I can't see either Bill or Charlie wanting to take on the mantle of a head of an ancient and noble house. Bill said before he'll have his hands full with just being the head of a noble house, and he'd rather just do his job at Gringotts. And Charlie just loves his dragons too much to actually move back to England and take on a lordship, which means the Pruitt title may fall to Percy. He shook his head slightly at the mention of the brother who had been making a solid effort to redeem himself after everything he had done. Hermione pursed her lips. All of this was just so medieval. She turned to look at Blaise and Daphne.
What about you two? Is it the same for you?
The two Slytherins shared a look before Blaise shrugged. I'll take over the head of house duties after I graduate, like Susan. My mum's been acting as a regent since her father died when I was 4. Mum was his only child, so he named me as his heir.
Daphne looked uncomfortable. Most of the ancient and noble houses are a bit conservative. There are a few progressive families, but remember what we told you when we allied our families last spring? House Greengrass is patriarchal, like most of the others. That means women can't inherit. Hermione shook her head. That's just so...
Daphne nodded. Yeah, it is. Especially since I don't have a brother, which means there's a possibility the line could end with my dad.
Couldn't he change the rules or something?
Hermione asked, still scandalized that in this day and age something like gender could play such a huge role.
Daphne shook her head.
It's really a much more involved process than that, she informed the Muggleborn. It can be done, but it would take a long time.
He has actually told me that he wants to do it, but may not try, even if they want to. It involves a petition to the Wizengamot, a changing of the family charter. More than likely, whomever I marry, if he doesn't have a title of his own, will take on the mantle of Lord Greengrass. If he does have a title, my second son, if I have one, could claim the dormant Greengrass line, as my husband's son would be duty-bound to carry his line.
Hermione shook her head. It just seems so strange.
And a bit confusing until you get the hang of it, Susan agreed. We grew up knowing all this, so it's all right to think it odd.
Hermione looked a little more relieved at that.
Harry sighed.
I know how you feel, Hermione. I thought it was weird too, when Sirius started teaching me. I'm just glad that the Potters changed their family charter about 500 years ago, so I don't have to be embarrassed to be the head of such a medieval-thinking family. Our charter states that the head of the family may appoint any family member he or she chooses as heir apparent. I believe they changed it specifically because the head of house didn't want to appoint his son as heir. The boy was arrogant and self-centered, and had no ability to run the family, but it came in handy a couple of centuries later, when the then Lord Potter had 2 daughters and no sons.
Hermione nodded, happy that her friend agreed with her about all this.
Harry shrugged.
Anyway, it's getting pretty late. Are you going to be staying for supper?
He asked, looking around at his friends.
Hermione had to get home to her parents, and Daphne didn't want to leave Astoria alone for the evening, since her father was at the same meeting Sirius had left for in a hurry earlier in the afternoon. But the rest accepted the offer, and they all headed upstairs. Ron and Ginny were thankful for the invitation, since they knew their mother was meeting with Bill, Fleur, and a florist that evening to pick out flower arrangements for the ceremony, so they would have been on their own with the meal anyway. The next few days passed by somberly, as the Daily Prophet reported multiple attacks on Muggles and wizards alike. Though it upset Harry and his friends greatly, there wasn't much they could do beyond train and research Voldemort's Horcruxes. The way to stop the attacks was to kill the one who had ordered them. Since Harry knew that he and Sirius would probably be spending a good deal of time at Gringotts on the 31st, he and Neville planned to have their party on the 30th, Neville's birthday. It was a bright sunny day as the large group gathered at McGonagall Castle. The morning was spent playing Quidditch and running around in their animal forms, before everyone came together to partake in the fantastic lunch spread the house elves had laid out. Once everyone had eaten, Harry and Neville spent most of the afternoon opening presents. The friends had gotten them gifts suited to their interests, where their guardians had gifted them with the traditional wizard's watches that all the wizards received on their 17th birthday. Both teenagers were emotional that they were informed that the watches had previously belonged to their fathers. When Harry turned his over, admiring the fine craftsmanship, he found himself choke up even more, seeing the engraving of a stag and a doe on the back. He looked at Sirius, and his godfather smiled, nodding sadly.
James had the engraving put there after Lily completed the Animagus transformation.
Harry gave him a hug, trying to pour all of his thanks for everything the man had done into the gesture. He thought Sirius understood when he returned the hug just as tightly. As the evening began to wind down, Harry managed to pull Augusta aside for a few minutes. Once they were in a secluded corner of the yard, he hesitantly told her about his idea to cure Alice and Frank. At first, Augusta was angry. "What makes you think you can just plan something like this? Get our hopes up? For nothing! The healers said they can't be cured." He knew that he had to remain calm and rational.
Mrs. Longbottom, I know how you feel. More importantly, I know how Neville feels. That's why I started doing this research. Because I would give anything to have my parents back.
Augusta took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Be that as it may."
Harry cut her off. "Mrs. Longbottom, I'm not just bringing an errant thought to you. I've done my research. I've trained. And I think I've got a real chance. I didn't want to say anything to you or Neville before I had a better idea of whether or not this would work. I didn't want to get your hopes up, but I'm coming to you now because I want to give this a try before school starts.
Augusta pursed her lips, studying her grandson's friend.
You really think this will work?
She asked, her voice shaky. Harry nodded steadily. Augusta glanced over at Neville, who was currently talking about something with Blaze and Luna, one arm snaked around Susan's waist. She turned back to Harry. I will allow you to make this attempt, but please do not say anything to Neville. I don't want him to be disappointed if... She trailed off, but Harry understood, and he nodded again.
Agreed. Thank you, Mrs. Longbottom.
Augusta attempted a smile, but knew it didn't come out quite right. I know you said that you don't want us to get our hopes up, and I'm not trying to.
But the idea of having my son and daughter-in-law back, she sniffed. I've missed them so much over the last nearly 16 years. To see them and not have them recognize me. I hate it, and I know Neville hates going to St. Mungo's, but I supposed I kept dragging him there because I hoped that if we saw them enough, eventually they would remember.
Harry nodded understandingly.
I get it. And Neville shares your hope, you know. He once told me that he figured that if there were no hope of recovery, his parents wouldn't still be breathing.
Augusta's smile this time was much more believable.
I don't say nearly enough how proud I am of that boy.
Harry grinned.
He knows. Believe me, he knows. He loves you so much, and he would do anything for you. And he knows that you love him. He shrugged. Sometimes, though, it's nice to just hear it, out loud. I think we should always take the opportunity to tell our loved ones how much they mean to us, especially in times like this. Nothing is certain, and you never know what might happen.
Augusta nodded and reached out, resting a hand gently on Harry's shoulder.
You are absolutely right, Harry, and thank you for even attempting such an impossible task. I know I'm scared, afraid to hope, afraid that it won't work, but even the idea of reversing the curse makes me feel years younger.
Harry ducked his head, embarrassed.
I know I can't get my parents back, but I figured it's not too late for Neville. I'll let you know when we're planning on trying, and I promise I won't say anything to Neville.
He hurried back to his friends, missing the way Augusta wiped her eyes to get rid of the evidence of tears. A while later, the group had shuffled around. Most of the group was out on the Quidditch pitch, starting yet another game, as Blaze really wanted to win. Just once. Hermione and Susan found themselves off to one side, neither one really interested in playing. Hermione kept trying to figure out what to say to the Hufflepuff. She knew she had been behaving rather bratty, ever since they had gotten their Hogwarts letters. But she was embarrassed, and always hated admitting when she was wrong. Susan sighed, a slight smile on her face as she looked over at the Gryffindor. It's all right, Hermione. I get it. Hermione glanced up, startled. What? She asked. Susan shook her head. You've been working towards the head girl position since your first year at Hogwarts. You were surprised and disappointed, and probably a little jealous when I got the badge instead, right? Hermione nodded guiltily. I'm sorry, Susan. I'm happy for you. She shrugged helplessly. But Susan understood. You just needed some time to get used to it. Hermione nodded again. Thank you for being such a good friend, Susan. I know I don't always deserve your understanding, and when I calmed down and thought about it, I realized that what Harry had told me was true. You would make a better head girl than me, because you're more approachable. I do tend to ostracize people a bit with my study habits. Susan smiled. Self-awareness is a good thing, Hermione. There's nothing wrong with being studious, but sometimes that's not what the other students need. and the head girl needs to be someone that the younger years feel comfortable coming to with their problems, as well as someone who is a leader in the student body. You're a leader, definitely. You just need to work a bit on the other part. Hermione sighed, but agreed, before Neville called for Susan to come and help him beat Harry in their Quidditch game, something Hermione privately didn't think was possible. When she had last checked in, the score had Harry and his team nearly 100 points in the lead. Susan gave Hermione a somewhat exasperated look, before she got up and brushed the grass off her jeans as she headed towards the brooms. The next day, Harry and Sirius were up early and heading to Diagon Alley before most people would even be sitting down to their morning tea. They had an appointment with Sharptooth for 8 o'clock, and it would not do to be late to an appointment with a goblin. They were immediately ushered down the hallway, Harry recognised as leading to Sharptooth's office, as soon as they entered into the bank. Harry knew they usually received good service from the goblins, but this was swift, even from them. Sharptooth looked up as they entered and gave them the goblin equivalent of a smile.
Welcome, Lord Black. Harry, we have a lot of business to take care of today. And so, let us begin. Agreed?
Harry and Sirius nodded as they sat down. The next few hours passed by at a steady pace, as they went over the vast holdings of the Potter family in more detail than Harry ever had before. They discussed land and monetary matters, as well as the stocks and shares the Potter family held in various businesses. By the time lunch rolled around, Harry was mentally exhausted. His wrist was starting to cramp as well, from all the things he had had to sign. Sharptooth ordered a noon meal in for them, and after a short break to eat, they got back to work. After another hour or so, Sharptooth pulled out an intrinsically carved wooden box. Opening it, he reached in and grasped the gold ring within. When the goblin put the box down, Harry saw that he was holding the Potter family ring. Sharptooth observed Harry, his fierce expression serious.
Do you, Harry James Potter, vow to uphold the duties and responsibilities of House Potter to the best of your knowledge and ability?
Harry swallowed.
I do,
he replied, hoping he sounded as calm as he most definitely didn't feel. Sharptooth nodded once.
Do you, Harry James Potter, swear to remain true to House Potter and utilize your power and heritage to strengthen and support the wizarding world? I do,
Harry said again. Sharptooth held out the ring for Harry to take. The new Lord Potter slipped it on the fourth finger of his right hand, as the goblin continued.
This ring symbolizes your status as a lord of an ancient and noble house of Potter. Wear it well.
Harry nodded, looking at his new ring. He had seen it before, when he was in his vault, but this was the first time he had really studied it. It had a nice weight to it, though he felt it might take some getting used to, as he generally didn't wear much jewellery. Sharptooth cleared his throat and took out another box.
This is the Gryffindor family ring. If you wish it, we can go over the accounts and holdings now, and you can claim that lordship as well.
Harry glanced at Sirius, and on his nod agreed. The rest of the afternoon was eaten up by taking care of the Gryffindor family business, but soon enough they were done, and Harry now had 2 rings adorning his right hand.
Both rings can be hidden, if you wish, Sharptooth informed him. Merely concentrate on the ring to becoming invisible, and it will disappear from sight, until you desire for it to be seen again.
Harry immediately did so for the Gryffindor ring, but decided to leave the Potter one visible.
Are there any other properties to the Gryffindor ring?
Sirius asked curiously.
I know the Black family ring includes a shield against the mind arts, and the Potter one has a mild physical shielding charm.
Sharptooth looked apologetic.
I am sorry, but there is not much known about the Gryffindor family. We keep charge of the vault and their money and assets, but the family itself has fallen into obscurity a bit, I'm afraid. There may be information in the Gryffindor vault, but beyond that, I cannot help you.
Harry nodded, smiling slightly.
That's all right, Sharptooth. Thank you for all your help today.
Sharptooth inclined his head.
It was a pleasure, Lord Potter.
His grin was slightly amused, and Harry knew that the goblin understood how much Harry didn't like his fame or being treated differently, just because he was wealthy. But on a day like today, he figured it was all right. After all, he had just taken on the mantle of Head of House Potter, one of the oldest and wealthiest wizarding families in Britain. Sirius stood up, Harry following a moment later.
Thank you for everything, Sharptooth,
Sirius said, offering his hand for the goblin to shake.
May your gold ever flow. And your family struck down before you,
Sharptooth replied, shaking Sirius's hand firmly. After shaking Harry's hand as well, the two wizards departed the goblin's office, making for the exit quickly. They had been gone most of the day, and both were feeling weary and hungry, looking forward to nothing so much as a large supper and then bed. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. Okay, so the badges, Harry telling Augusta his plans, and of course the lordship. Now, this thing with Hermione, it's very real, and I appreciate the way they handled it. It's very well done. So yeah, I feel sorry for her, but it's good that it didn't fall into her lap. Sometimes we don't achieve our dream, but we can adapt and grow and evolve. So yeah, anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.